All right, let's dive into some of the biggest ideas that shape our world. We're about to go on a journey, really, across the whole spectrum of political thought. We're going to explore the isms that have built nations, sparked revolutions, and really defined entire centuries. And you know what? It all boils down to one single fundamental question.
Just think about that for a second. I mean, how much power should a government have over your life? This question is at the very heart of almost every political debate we have. It's the central tension, the core problem that every single political theory is trying to solve.
That's right. Every major political theory you've ever heard of is basically just a different answer to that one question. So what we're going to do is map them out on a spectrum. Think of it like a line with a bunch of stops along the way, stretching from zero government interference on one end all the way to absolute total state control on the other.
So, our journey begins at one extreme end of that spectrum. This is the zone where the individual is king, where personal freedom and individual rights are prized above absolutely everything else.
And this brings us to the absolute zero point on our power spectrum, anarchism. It's the belief in a society with, well, no state at all. Philosophers like William Godwin argued that people are fundamentally rational, that if we just used our reason, we could cooperate voluntarily without needing any government or police to force us to behave.
Okay, now let's take just one small step away from that absolute zero. Here we find libertarianism. Now, libertarians accept that we need some kind of state, but a tiny one. They call it a night watchman state. Drawing on ideas from John Locke, they'd say the government's only legitimate job is to protect our natural rights, life, liberty, and property. And that's it, full stop.
To really get inside the libertarian mindset, especially when it comes to economics, you have to understand this idea of unseen consequences. And the French economist Frédéric Bastiat explained this perfectly with a really simple story. Imagine a young kid throws a rock and breaks a shopkeeper's window. So what is seen is that the shopkeeper has to hire a glazier to fix the window. Money changes hands, the glazier has work. It looks like the broken window actually stimulated the economy, right? But what is not seen is what the shopkeeper would have spent that money on if the window hadn't been broken. Maybe he was going to buy a new pair of shoes. The key point here is that society hasn't actually gained anything, it has just lost the value of a window. Destruction is not profit. Okay, now let's slam on the brakes and do a complete 180. We're leaving behind the world where the state is seen as a potential threat to freedom. We're now moving into a whole different way of thinking, where the state is seen as a powerful tool for advancing the goals of a larger group. So, in this part of our journey, the main focus isn't the individual person anymore. Instead, it's the collective. And that collective could be defined by culture, ethnicity, or even economic class. First up, we have nationalism. A key thinker here was the German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder. He argued that the most fundamental group is the folk, a people bound together by a common language, a shared culture, and a deep history. This idea taps into a really powerful human need for belonging. For nationalists, this shared identity is the most important thing, and it deserves its own state to protect it. And right next door, we find socialism. This is another form of collectivism, but its focus is all about economics. Socialists believe that the big, important stuff in an economy, the factories, the land, the resources, should be controlled by society as a whole, usually through the state. It's often a response to the massive inequalities that can come from capitalism, and it argues that the benefits of everyone's work should go to the community, not just a few individuals. We've now arrived at the far, far end of our spectrum. We're in a place where the state's power isn't just big, it's all-encompassing. It's designed to reach into every single nook and cranny of life. Now, there's a really critical distinction to make here. An authoritarian regime, for instance, wants to control what you do. It'll crush political opponents for sure. But a totalitarian regime, well, it wants to control what you think. It leaves no room for a private life. It wants to completely remake culture, history, even your deepest beliefs to fit its ideology. And believe me, this is not just some abstract theory. In the 20th century, this idea became a terrifying reality. In just a few decades, these kinds of states exploded onto the world stage, from fascist Italy and Nazi Germany to the Soviet Union under Stalin and later China under Mao. A truly chilling example of this is Mao's Cultural Revolution in China. This was a direct, violent attempt to achieve total control by literally destroying the past. Young people, the Red Guards, were encouraged to humiliate their own teachers, to tear down ancient temples and art, all in an effort to erase traditional Chinese culture and forge a brand new, revolutionary person from the ashes. Okay, so we've got the theories, we have these grand ideas, but what actually happens when they leave the philosopher's book and collide with the messy, complicated real world? Let's take a look. Imperialism is maybe the most obvious physical expression of state power you can get. It's simply the practice of one nation extending its control over others. And this is so often fueled by nationalist ideas, a belief in one's own cultural or racial superiority, which then turns the state into a tool for conquest. And this isn't a new idea. Long before modern nationalism, you had figures like Genghis Khan who practiced imperialism in its rawest form. His Mongol armies carved out the largest land empire in history through what historians basically call naked force and simple looting. It was a direct projection of power for the sake of getting bigger and richer. Now, fast forward to the 20th century. A lot of newly independent nations tried to put socialist ideas into practice. In Egypt, you had Nasser's Arab socialism, and in Tanzania, Julius Nyerere tried something called ujamaa, which means familyhood. Both of them were aiming for collective prosperity, but in reality, these state-controlled economic models often ran into serious trouble and led to stagnation.
So what about the other end of the spectrum? Well, during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, anarchists got a rare chance to actually test their theories. In huge parts of Spain, they completely abolished the state and organized everything into voluntary collectives. It became one of history's biggest and most important real-world experiments in anarchism.
So we've traveled all the way from the ideal of total individual freedom to the harsh reality of total state control. We've seen how these ideas have been debated, defined, and put into brutal action all throughout history. And what's the big takeaway here? It's that all of these complicated names and theories, all these isms, they're really just part of one single ongoing human conversation. They are all just different attempts to find the right balance, to find the right answer to that fundamental question we started with: how much power should the state have? And that brings us right back to today. In a world that's dealing with global pandemics, climate change, and the explosion of digital surveillance, this debate over state power versus individual freedom is more intense and more relevant than ever. Which really leaves us with one final thought. Where on the spectrum do you think we're heading next?